Welcome back. Well, China's rapid economic growth has been spectacular and has defied all expectations. Averaging 10% growth a year for 3 decades, it now has the world's 4th largest economy. It's expected to become the 2nd largest within a decade. This has been driven by the huge growth in Chinese exports. Because of this, Beijing's trade surplus stands at a massive $178 billion. This explosive growth has also seen China's foreign reserves, already the largest in the world, surge to $1.2 trillion. At home, the stock market has soared as incomes climb. Indeed, one of China's greatest successes has been reducing the number of those living in poverty. In 1990, 1 in 3 Chinese were living below the poverty line compared to just 1 in 10 today. Yet for many, the situation remains bleak. Some 130 million people live in poverty, on top of an estimated 100 million rural workers drifting between the villages and cities in search of work. Again, the gap between rich and poor in China is widening and threatening social unrest. This wasn't lost on the Chinese president. Hu Jintao recently warned of the growing disparity between rich and poor.
There are still a considerable number of impoverished and low-income people in both urban and rural areas, and it has become more difficult to accommodate the interests of all sides.
Well, joining us again are our guests in Beijing, Shen Shishun. He's director of the Asia-Pacific Study Division at China Institute of International Studies. In Munich, Grace Zhu, director for international relations of the Federation for Democratic China. And in London, Andrew Leung, a China specialist and formerly Hong Kong's chief representative to the United Kingdom. Shen Shishun in Beijing, let me start with you for the second part of the programme. I mean, China has experienced extraordinary economic growth, yet 130 million people still live below the poverty line. So what's the Politburo got to do to spread the wealth more evenly, do you think?
You can see that the Central Committee already made a great plan for the future 5 years, and to build a prosperous, moderate, prosperous society, to build a harmonious society at home, and make towards a harmonious world abroad. And of course, the people are concerning about the increasing of the living standard, and also the medical welfare, and the housing, and all those basic problems. You know, actually, they have now they have the concrete plans to solve all those problems. Of course, they're also looking forward to narrow the gap between the poor and the rich, and measures should be taken to do that. And also, of course, the anti-corruption problem is also in the consideration. You can see that the new central government already takes some of the steps or express their determination to fight against corruption and other problems.
Grace Zhu in Munich, I mean, is the gap between rich and poor getting wider, as Shen Shishun in Beijing seems to think? I mean, some of the figures we have here is that 0.4% of the people own 70% of the wealth. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's the worst in the world. I mean, if you look at the reasons why there's such a wide disparity of wealth in China, it's because the corruption is so widespread in every corner of China. If you want to solve that problem, you need to do anti-corruption more thoroughly. If you cannot solve the anti-corruption, if you look at the things in this way, one of the human rights lawyers have said that one human rights lawyer can do more than 100 or 1,000 of anti-corruption officials. But why the government have put so many human rights lawyers in jail? Because they are afraid of to solve the corruption problems thoroughly, because they are going to threat the interest, the vested interest of a privileged group. That's the problem. And the abuses of the power of this privileged group is the ultimate reason why there's such social injustice in China.
Andrew Leung in London, critics point out the negative aspects of a free market economy, corruption, the widening class gap which we've spoken about. How will China tackle these issues, do you think?
Well, I think the corruption is still a very, very major issue in China, and the Chinese leadership is fully aware that corruption would threaten the collapse of the Communist Party if it is not handled carefully. And of course, there is a lot of emphasis on attacking corruption and so on. But much more importantly is addressing the kind of inequalities in China. So we are seeing that, for example, in the countryside, the agricultural tax, which has been with China for several thousand years, has been abolished, and there's been a greater resources being provided to promote education in the countryside and access to health care services and so on. But it's early days yet because it's a huge problem, and it's been with China for such a long time. But suffice it to say that the leadership is fully aware of all these major challenges. Shen
Shisheng in Beijing, I mean, do you think more prosperity will lead to more democracy and political reform?
Yes, I think so. You know, our President, General Secretary Hu Jintao mentioned in his reports that more than 60 times to talk about democracy, and the delegates also warmly discussed about this topic. That means China in the future, people will enjoy more freedom, more democratic. And also policy making were more democratic, especially the democratic within its party. So you can see that at various levels, I think the aim of one of the aim of reform is to let people have more freedom and more rights of knowledge, more rights of selective, and the more rights of themselves. So I think the people will enjoy abundant democracy under the new party leadership.
Grace Zhu in Munich, Beijing hosts the Olympic Games next year. I mean, how will China want to showcase itself in terms of human rights, in terms of democracy, something it promised the Olympic Committee would do?
Until now, we haven't seen any signs of the improvement of the human rights situation in China, as the Chinese government has promised before, as he got the right of hosting the Olympic Games. We've seen that more human rights lawyers are persecuted, are put in prison. Mr. Gao Zhishen, the famous human rights lawyer who has done his job by practicing Falun Gong practitioners and the other weak groups, have been persecuted, and before the 17th National Congress, he was detained somewhere else. And if you look at what the Chinese Communist Party has done in the past few years, more of the petitioners have been sent back to their villages where tortures or more punishment are waiting for them. There's no sign of any lessening of the control of internet and information access to the Chinese people. So we haven't seen any good signs from the Chinese government that are willing to improve the human rights situation in China. What they are promised and what they are doing right now is to polish the images, perhaps to shut down several of the factories to improve the condition of the quality of the air. But it doesn't help to solve the problem thoroughly.
OK, let me get a final thought from Andrew Leung in London. Andrew Leung, public anger over corruption and the growing wealth gap have seen rising protests across the country. Is this civil unrest set to continue? Very briefly.
Well, I think that I've talked about those issues already, but I want to highlight two things. First of all, of course, it's correct that Hu Jintao mentioned the D word, democracy, and no less than 60 times at the party congress. But what he meant was, of course, intra-party democracy. It's not Western democracy. But on the other hand, there is a great vibrant civil society developing in China. There are 36 million blog websites in China. Of course, there's still control as far as a handful of politically sensitive topics are concerned, but there is no denying the fact that there is the civil society is developing quite rapidly. Also, there are something like 80 million Christians in China, according to the latest research, and over 250,000 NGOs working in partnership with the government on a host of issues, including the environment. So we're seeing a completely different picture that is emerging on China's civil society, and that's a very good sign.
OK, we have to leave it there. Andrew Leung in London, Grace Zhu in Munich, and Shen Shishun in Beijing. Thank you all very much for your time. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We, of course, welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From the whole team here, goodbye for now.